that he even had his Bible with him from Vacation Bible School, and that it, ironically or not so, matched his shirt. So he even coordinated his Bible with his shirt this morning. So, but one thing about human nature, I believe, is the simple fact that each of us love a great story. And if you're like me, there's nothing better than a legend or a book or a song or a feature film that is compelling, and nothing more stays in my conscience for a long time than a true story, or based on a true story. And then again, if you are like me, there's nothing better that draws more interest in me than knowing that something happened and it was true, and that it kind of affects my life as well. In the interview process of going to seminary, the admissions director asked me a simple question. I went into his office, I had a seat, he looked at me and he said, "So what is your story?" Kind of what it is. I looked at him with the deer in the headlights, kind of sat there quietly thinking, maybe he'll move on, maybe I'll act like I didn't hear him. And then he asked me again, he says, "Why are you here? I mean, what do you have to share to people?" Thought a little bit more, and he says, "What is your story?" So then I began to open my mouth, and then the floodgates opened. And believe it or not, to see me who I am now, back then, that was very hard to do. To open up and begin to talk. See, I'm not shy to talk, or not shy to talk in front of people, or a lot of people, but to talk about the intimate details of my life, that's just a whole different new ballgame. And when it comes to telling our own story, sometimes, or most of us, begin to become guarded a little bit, if you will. It's not easy to open up and share. And why is that? Well, because for some of us, maybe that's just not part of our personality. Maybe our DNA makeup is we're just more quiet, we're more reserved, we don't show emotion. And then that's okay. It's not a bad thing. That's just who we are in our makeup. And for some of us, maybe it's just too painful. Maybe to go back and retell what has happened to us or what happened in our life is just really too painful to share. It's stated, and Abby shared with me this week that it's stated she learned in her class, education going to good cause there, that in counseling, if something traumatic has helped you, you need to tell your story 70 to 80 times out loud before you begin, or what happened to you before you begin to heal. And maybe that's just too painful. And then the last not least, maybe we just don't open up and share because you know what? Maybe some stuff in our life just ain't nobody's business, They just don't even know. And the Bible is as I shared with the children, it's literally a library. It's a collection of stories and books that reveal to us the nature and characteristics of God. But it's also filled with true stories about how God functions in this world in which we live. And we forget sometimes that these were oral stories. These were told down from generation to generation until they were finally put in hundreds of years later, were finally put in written form and preserved in kind of this timeless capsule, if you will. And we often fail to realize is the simple fact that our story is a part of God's story. And it's just not recorded in this library that we have. I mean, we forget that our life is a continuation of God's work in this world. So we need to tell our story. We must tell our story even when it's hard and uncomfortable. Because an untold story doesn't help anyone. We must let's tell them about God. So here we go. I was in second grade at a new school called Woodland Presbyterian School. Woodland Presbyterian in that day and still today is the most expensive, private, exclusive Christian school in Memphis, Tennessee. I came in second grade from the public school system. My first day, I could tell that I was a fish out of water. I could tell my first day of second grade that my fellow students' families were rich. I mean super rich. I mean their parents owned famous corporations that we all know like FedEx and AutoZone and International Paper. And so I hope that everyone that day, no one would notice. You know, no one would notice because, see, I was there because my public school closed and my parents didn't want me bused across town to a different school. Didn't want them to know that my dad worked double shifts at DuPont Chemical Plant for me to just even be there. And so day one, I was not happy. I could hear the remarks by the way I was dressed. I could hear the remarks about how fat I was. I mean, I was told I was a husky kid, but I didn't really know the difference there. And I could hear the conversations about what was I doing there. And I could recall the anger and the resentment that I felt. I remember even at an early age using my creativity to create and craft these fictional stories in my mind, and that I would even tell my classmates about why I was there just so they would accept me. And then at the end of school, of the first day on the playground, when everyone else went off and were playing, and I sat alone in the jungle gym by myself, staring down at the ground, this kid walks up to me. He walks up to me and he smiles, and he says, "Hey, I'm David Tucker." And from that moment on, we were connected. We were connected. And then me and him were best friends and we're inseparable. And then things really didn't change much until 5th grade. And I remember my 2nd grade teacher, Miss Leonard, how kind and compassionate and generous she was. She got me caught up where I was behind academically, and she just took extra time with me. It really made an impact. And now I'm in 5th grade. And we were lining up in the middle of class in front of everyone. And this one kid called me fat. And I said, "Look, if you call me fat again, I'm going to beat the snot out of you." But I didn't use the word snot. His response, as all the girls and everyone were looking at me, his response were, "You are fucked." Bam. I busted him. Busted his lip, his nose in one shot, right in front of the whole class and the teacher. I will never forget being sent out into the hall as the teacher cleaned up the mess and as the kid was crying. I remember standing in the hall, looking down at the ground, and here comes Miss Leonard. And I will never forget the words she said to me. She said, "Tommy, don't let other people's words control your actions." One of the results of my punch was that no one, for my rest of my time there, ever called me fat again. The second was for the rest of my 5th grade year, I had to eat lunch by myself, sitting at a table, shunned from the rest of the school and my classmates. And then I also remembered I learned something called anger issues and poor self-control through some conversations with some people. But each and every day, as lunch came and I was sitting at the table by myself, each and every day, David Tucker would walk by, give me a smile, and give me one of these. No one called me fat anymore. And I guess they were afraid. I don't know. But David was there. David was loyal as he stood beside me as my best man when I married the love of my life. He actually broke into the labor and delivery room by evading security by wearing a tux at 2:30 in the morning just to hold our daughter Abby for the first time. Throughout every major event of my life, David was present with me. He showed up at my dad's funeral, although it made him so uncomfortable. He hated funerals. It meant so much to me because I knew exactly how much David despised funerals. And whenever I needed him, he was there. There was no question, there was no judgment, there was no expectations. And I was there. I was there when David's family had to make the decision to take David off life support. And I was present with him as he transitioned from this life into the next. And David's death took this huge chunk out of me. It damaged my soul like no other. And I got the great honor of officiating his funeral and offering hope and healing and comfort to his family after his passing. I've got to be sort of a godfather to his son to this day. And it all started with a simple smile and an introduction. That's why I decided to just smile a little. I just decided to smile a little, especially when I meet strangers. I just try to smile and to let people know that there's still some joy in this world. But I will admit that some days are harder than others, but we never know what a simple smile can do. Paul conveys this very concept, that we need to tell our story. He does it in a letter he writes to the church at Ephesus. But if you listen closely, he tells us not to just tell everything about our life. He tells us how to tell our story. And if you will, turn to me to the 4th chapter of Ephesians, beginning with the 29th verse. This is how Paul tells us to tell our story as part of God's story. He says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ, God, forgave you." Paul says, tell your story, but only the parts that may be helpful. I mean, it's not to gossip, it's not to put others down, it's to lift up others up and to speak to their needs. I mean, if someone is struggling with addiction issues, you don't tell them the cute little thing that your puppy did last night. I mean, I love puppies, but it's not relevant. And then we all know some people that no matter how the conversation begins or no matter what, they always kind of turn it around back to them and not us. Paul says, don't do that. Only share what is helpful. Paul says telling our story is to get the bitterness and rage and anger out. And sure, we need to work through those things and come to a place where we do share those things, but telling our story is not to dump that on them. It has to come from a healthy place where all resentment is resolved and we have a reflection perspective on the bigger picture, if you will. And Paul reminds us when we share our story to also be compassionate, both to the listener as well as being forgiving to whoever's in our story. You see, me and the kid I punched, we became decent friends. We're still Facebook friends. we went through school. We kind of put it behind us. I mean, but I learned in that situation that it's much more rewarding to fight for people than it is to fight people. And I wish I learned everything that there was to know about anger issues and poor impulse control. I wish I learned it all that day in 5th grade. But it took me much longer time, and it took me more and more lessons. But God, through more true stories, got most of that out of me. And it can flare up every now and then if I see an injustice or if my family is threatened or hurt. It's not all the way gone, but it's more of a story about God's redemption in my own life. There is a donut shop about 5 blocks north of my parents' house and the house that I grew up in. And I went there all the time. It's open 24 hours a day, so all the years and seasons of my life, I found myself there at all times of the day, in the morning, in all kinds of conditions. And when Abby started school, every Friday we would go there for breakfast before I took her to school. And then when Will started school, it was Abby and Will, and every Friday we would go and have donuts at this one shop. And we cannot return to Memphis without going to Gibson's Donuts. And if you ask any Memphian, they will tell you what an icon this place is. Every time I would go in the morning, I would see John Calipari, who used to be the coach of Memphis. It's a place where everyone is. A couple of weeks ago, I went back for my sister's surgery, and at 5 o'clock in the morning on my way to the hospital, I found myself sitting in Gibson's Donuts. And I got my order, my 2 large eclairs and my skim milk. You got to have a balanced diet. Got to be balanced. And so as I went to take my seat in the booth, I picked up a Memphis Flyer magazine. It's a free magazine that goes into the area. I sat down at a booth and I started to eat and flip through the magazine. And as I did, I looked over and I found myself in that weird kind of awkward position, if you will. If you've ever eaten alone or in a restaurant, it's that weird place where you're sitting in one booth facing one way, and there's another booth there, and someone else is eating alone facing your way. So you're kind of looking at each other with kind of 2 tables in between, and you don't know each other. And it can just be kind of awkward, you know, while you're eating, you think they're staring at you, and you're staring at them. It's just one of those things. And as I ate, I looked up and I noticed a middle-aged lady looking at me as I was looking at her. And I couldn't really tell if she'd been up really late or she got up really early. But she kind of sheepishly looked at me. And I didn't want her to think that I was going to bug her or rob her or was a pervert or anything. So I just smiled and said, "Hi, I'm Tommy." And she nervously looked down and then looked back at me and she said, "I'm Kim. Do you always read that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can." And proud uncle moment. My niece is actually the editor and writes for the Memphis Flyer. So yeah, I mean, you know, well, you know. And then she kind of looks back and she says, "Well, if she works for, then what do you do?" And there's that awkward time. When people do what I do, when people ask, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work for a church." And then she began to give me details. And she began to tell her story to me. And she began to get this long, drawn-out, painful story that happened to her about how the church had really, truly burned her, if you will, and hurt her. And she told me details about a bad decision that she had made in her life, and how instead of loving her or understanding her, that these people in this church literally did begin to judge her and shun her and kind of push her away. And she said, "You know, I still love Jesus, but I just can't go back to church." And she said, "You know what, though? But I tell my friends all the time when they're going through a tough time, I always tell them, you want to go back to church. They just can't." And then she said something that stuck with me that I still to this day just can't shake. She said, "You know, I believe that most people the most called people of the church are the ones who are never called to preach. Let me say that again. She says, I believe that the most called people of the church are the ones who are never called to preach. And I wanted to say, excuse me? I mean, did I tell you I punched a kid in 5th grade? And then she continued. She said, people never realize what they have done in the lives of others. Wow. Kim was so right. I mean, she was saying, what she was saying was the people who make the biggest impact in the lives of others in a faith community is not the one from the pulpit, but the one that indulge in conversation and relationships. That's where it's done. So in telling and retelling the true story of their own lives is with the power of the Holy Spirit. That's what can change lives. And I said, Kim, I need you in my faith community. I mean, we don't use the word church. Here's why. And she says, why? I said, I explained, we're more of a family and a community than the church. I said, but we need to hear your story. We need you and we need your story at our doors, welcoming people each and every morning. And then I smiled. And she said, I'd love to go to your church. I'd love to go to your faith community that has a minister like you. I like the cool tattoos. She says, where is it? And I said, it's in Centralia, Illinois. And she says, where the hell is that? Near Chicago? I was like, no. And I explained to her that Illinois is bigger than just Chicago. There's a lot of other things going on. And she said, as we began to move on to other things, and as I was finishing my last declare, she says, you know what? I never tell people what I just told you. Never tell people what I just told you. And I said, I know why you told me. It's your story. It's your story. Whether you knew it or not, you just kind of bumped into the church. Here at Gibson's Donut Shop. And when you bumped into the church, you felt comfortable enough with me to be honest, which in turn made you confident enough to tell your story. So we need to realize that sharing our story is part of our discipleship of following Jesus. And it will be awkward at times. It will be uncomfortable at times. It will be painful at times. But telling someone validates what you have been through. It authenticates that God is still working in your life. Your story says, this is what I've been through, and here I am, and here I am. And I still may have a long way to go, but here I am. And then as a faith community, if we begin to listen a bit, and you begin to tell your story, and we begin to listen, and then you let other people in the community kind of love on you a bit. Because sometimes when we tell our story and it's painful, we just need a hug, we just need to be loved on a little bit. And you come into a group that doesn't judge you or go tell someone else your story. And please, hear this from a fat kid who felt like he had no worth, who God has blessed beyond measure. Beyond measure. And to understand that our story is part of God's story. And acknowledge the fact that every one of us has a true story to tell. We are all based on a true story. And everyone has a right to tell their story. And you never know. You never know how simple it can be by just smiling and say, hey, my name is Tommy. You Pray with me.